welcome to today's talk, Thursday the 23rd of December. Now, we've got some pretty interesting data on the spread of Omicron and the symptoms and the risk of hospitalizations with Omicron today. Just before we do that, we're keeping an eye on some critical information, and we're watching this on a daily basis. Well, I watch 2 or 3 times a day every time there's an update. So this is South Africa. So we see there's 9,300 people currently in hospital in South Africa with a positive diagnosis of Omicron, only a little bit higher than the UK, about 2,000 higher than the UK, with a similar population. So we see that the hospitals in South Africa are not being flooded with Omicron patients. They are simply not, and we're more than 4 weeks into this now. Patients on oxygen in all of South Africa for a population of 60 million, 1,329. Altogether, patients on oxygen in the whole country in hospital who have got a positive SARS coronavirus 2 diagnosis, which, as we know, in South Africa is 98% Omicron. So we are not seeing a dire situation develop in South Africa. We're just not. And then one more from this that we're keeping an eye on. This is the one from the UK. We will check. This could have been updated actually by the time we go off this recording. It's updated about now. But hospitalizations with Omicron in the UK currently, that's the number there, 195 out of 7,500. So 7,500 patients in hospital with SARS coronavirus 2, 195 with confirmed Omicron, 18 deaths. We don't know whether these deaths are with or from. That is literally all we know about it at the moment. Now let's go on and look at some of the COVID symptom tracker information now. This is always fascinating to follow. This is more or less live time. Zoe update. This was actually yesterday's update. Actually, just to prove it's live time, let's just have a quick look at today's. This is today's. So we see over 1.5 million people symptomatic in the UK at the moment. Number of new cases are all-time high, 151,000. And we can see that the dots are further apart, aren't they? There's a sharp increase. So a very sharp increase for a prevalence of, on the 23rd, which is today, the prevalence figure there is 1,549, so 1.5 million. Always good to get that up to date, basically lifetime data. And of course, first thing I do in the morning, I'll put my mobile phone on and I update it. Now, these are the references for Zoe application. So 144,000 new daily symptomatic COVID cases in the UK, up to the average up to yesterday. It's a lot. In people who've had at least 2 doses of vaccines, there was 56,000 new daily symptomatic cases. So we are seeing a lot of people who've had 2 or 3 doses of vaccine who are, emphatically, are getting symptomatic COVID-19, believed to be mostly Omicron variant. This is breaking through big time into symptomatic infection. The people that are vaccinated, of course, typically they have a milder illness, they have less symptoms, and they're much less likely to be hospitalized. But they're still getting a lot of symptomatic disease. I'm sure a lot are getting asymptomatic disease, but of course, COVID symptom tracker study by definition doesn't pick those up. So 70% of cases in England now are Omicron. We've moved over. The R value is currently 1.2, so we're increasing. The R value in London, which is leading the way, is 1.5. Now let's just have a look at some Zoe data now. I think we can see some of that. So these are the new symptomatic cases in the United Kingdom on the 20th of December. These are in doubly vaccinated people, so we can see there's a lot of symptomatic infection, and we can see that that's gone up dramatically with the Omicron. So we can see that the symptomatic infections have gone up dramatically in the vaccinated during this time of Omicron. So pretty clear correlation there. This is all people, including a lot who are unvaccinated. So that's new cases in the UK. This one is regional, and the big thing to notice here is this is the London data. So symptomatic cases have shot up in London, and there is no question that where London is leading, the rest of the country is going to follow. This is the pattern that we've predicted for some time now. New cases in the UK on the 19th of December, as we said, the R value is 1.2, so a sharp rise in new daily cases up to, well, as we've said, about 140,000. And that's just up to the 19th of December. Incidence by age group, so the 18 to 35s, particularly in London here, are the highest growth in number of cases. The more at-risk groups still, thankfully, much lower. Let's look at some of our usual orientation graphics. The new daily confirmed COVID-19 cases per million, and we see that Japan is still doing best of all in the world. Australia, they are going up due to Omicron spreading, particularly in New South Wales, as we said. Canada going up. United States, the Omicron increase in cases has definitely started. France, Ireland, likewise. United Kingdom and Gibraltar. Now, I put Gibraltar on here because, now the reason I put Gibraltar on there is, as we know, Gibraltar is one of the most highly vaccinated populations in the world. Relatively small population, but the vaccination uptake's about 140% from what I remember. And yet we're still seeing all these breakthrough symptomatic infections in Gibraltar. These are breaking through the Omicron infections. The symptomatic infections are breaking through, giving symptomatic infection. Denmark still high. Denmark's actually reached its genomic sequencing capacity. But of course, all these people in Gibraltar that are getting these infections, they're being protected largely from hospitalisation, from severe illness, but they're getting a massive boost. This is a natural immune boost that they're getting from their Omicron exposure. So you could argue that this is potentially, could turn out to be the best thing that's ever happened. So we'll see, but that's looking fairly promising. Now, going on, looking at some more orientation, number of patients in hospital per million with COVID-19, so Canada, Denmark. See Denmark with high case detection, but not so high hospitalisation. Ireland, the United Kingdom going up slightly, we know. The United States has remained high. This is mostly due to Delta in the United States still, but some Omicron effect coming through in France. Estimates of the R value. Now, this line here is 1. So anything below this, the cases are decreasing. Anything above this, they are increasing. So we see that absolutely everywhere has got an R value of above 1. So Ireland, United States, France, Japan, even Japan, although it's not showing yet. Denmark, Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia especially. And we see that the R value in Australia there is about, what, 1.5, 1.6 even. So cases increasing in all of those areas. New daily confirmed COVID-19 cases per million, looking at the South Africa data here. So we see that the cases in South Africa appear to be falling off. So we see that the cases in South Africa appear to be quite low and appear to be dropping off compared to the United States and the United Kingdom. Welcome. Doubly vaccinated people, so and that's just up to the 19th of December. Incidence by age group, so the 18 to 35s, particularly in London here, are the highest growth in number of cases. The more at-risk groups still, thankfully, much lower. The vaccination uptake's about 140% from what I remember. And yet we're still seeing all these breakthrough symptomatic infections in Gibraltar. These are breaking through the Omicron infections. The symptomatic infections are breaking through. Best thing that's ever happened. So we'll see, but the case, because there's not that much testing going on now in South Africa. So the real numbers are probably still climbing in South Africa. That looks like the most likely scenario. And then we look at weekly new hospital admissions for COVID-19 per million. In terms of admissions, yes, it is going up in South Africa, but as we saw, just over 9,000 for a population of 60 million, not yet at the Delta level seen in the United States. New daily confirmed deaths, and we see South Africa. Now, the case rate in South Africa grossly underrepresents the infections, but the hospitalizations and deaths are accurately recorded. So this is the case. The deaths are going up a little bit in South Africa, but not very much. Still below the UK, still well below the United States, and we believe this is accurate. And of course, this is after over 4 weeks now of Omicron. And the new daily confirmed COVID-19 deaths per million people in South Africa. Well, first wave, second wave, third wave, Omicron wave. So natural variant wave, South Africa, Beta variant wave, Delta variant wave, and now this Omicron wave with much, much lower numbers of deaths. Now, I've had an email from Brian who's explaining the testing situation in South Africa. And he does explain that tests are actually quite expensive. So it's about $14 just for an over-the-counter lateral flow test. And it's twice to 3 times that for a PCR test. So a lot of people are just using these cheap lateral flow tests. They are testing positive, but then that doesn't go onto the official statistics. So we know from Brian and from others in South Africa that the number of cases in South Africa is greatly underestimating the number of infections. So the Omicron is just rampant in South Africa now, and as we saw, despite very high numbers of infections, not accurately reflected in the cases, still getting relatively low numbers of hospitalisation. Now, this data that we've looked at from the UK and from Scotland will pad out in time, but so far it remains promising that we will be able to cope with this. There will be more hospitalisations, but we may well be over a very short period of time. So that looks like what's happening over the next few weeks, and thank you for watching.
If you want to lead something, start by saying, this is what I care about, this is what I want to do, and why I think you should care about it, and you should want to help.
Welcome to today's talk, Thursday the 23rd of December. Now, I've got some pretty interesting data on the spread of Omicron and the symptoms and the risk of hospitalizations with Omicron today. Just before we do that, we're keeping an eye on some critical information, and we're watching this on a daily basis. Well, I watch 2 or 3 times a day every time there's an update. So this is the
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Piano TV. So about a couple weeks ago, they had a music festival here in town, and a lot of my students participated in it. And I was there basically every day of the week, and I decided to take copious amounts of notes and just kind of absorb all of the information that the adjudicator was giving these kids in order to find some commonalities and just bits of information that I could then pass on to you and share things that I thought were interesting. I love music festival because even if you do like so good, you like blow everyone away, the adjudicator is still going to find something for you to work on. Like, for example, there was this kid who, the highest mark I saw was a 90 all festival long, and he played brilliantly, and even he got suggestions. So it's just, it kind of shows the kids that playing music is an eternal learning process, which is valuable to know as an adult as well. Anyway, let's get started. There are 4 main topics that we're going to cover in today's video. The first one is things related to the wrist and arm posture. This is probably one of the most talked about things on the festival week. And then we're going to kind of derail a little bit into staccatos. It's a short little category, but worth mentioning. Number 3 is interpretation and like how a piece is expressed. And then 4th is entertainment. So what we're going to do in each of these categories is talk about some important takeaways that I had from the week and kind of discuss finer points within each category. So pull up a chair if you're not sitting, or just keep doing what you're doing. Anyway, let's get started. So most of you already know that the tune of the piece, the melody, is the part that needs to come out louder and more clearly than the harmony. So a lot of the times that ends up being the left hand is the harmony, the left hand needs to be more subdued, and then the right hand is the melody, which needs to project a little bit above it. But there are some actual like physical gestures that you can do unconsciously that sabotage your ability to achieve this hand balance. And there are also some kind of body movements we can do that wreck our ability to play quickly. So let's go to the piano and talk about this. If the arm bounces, the sound projects a lot louder. And sometimes that's the effect we want, but if we're playing like a really, I don't know, like nice melody in the right hand, and then the left hand's like bouncing, then the left hand is gonna dominate the right. It's gonna overpower it. So the best thing we can do there is to keep our arm steady and play with our fingers more. So there's the bounce. You're steady. It's tough because it requires more finger control, but it's essential because it creates more sound control. So the other thing that the bouncy arm does is that it actually can slow down your playing. So if you're doing like a fast kind of passage like that, and you're kind of bouncing your arm, it's really, it looks so awkward when you kind of pinpoint it, trying to play like this, but it happens a lot, and I saw that more than once in festival. Yeah, where your arm is just kind of working against you. So when we want to play fast, we mainly play fast from the fingers. It's all in finger control, and if your arm's kind of moving, it's just going to impede you. So the next thing we're going to talk about is wrist position, because how your wrist moves when you play is really important to having a good performance. It's super common for people to play with droopy wrists, kind of like this. And I think maybe we just were wimpy or lazy and we kind of lack the strength in the wrist to raise them up a little bit. But the problem with droopy wrists is they cause you to play with flat fingers. You see how like especially my pinky, they all kind of like flatten out. Whereas when you raise the wrist, we can play on our fingertips. And if our wrist is low, our hands low, it's also really, really, really hard to play fast. It creates a lot of tension in there. So the adjudicator actually, she actually gave the kids this exercise where you hold out your hands and then you put your other hand in your hand. Hopefully you can see this. And then you put your wrist down and you try to play, like you try to move your fingers fast, like you're playing a scale. And you can really feel tension in there, and it's kind of awkward and spidery. Then she gets them to raise the wrist, not the elbow, the wrist, and do the same thing. And suddenly it's like your fingers are free. They can move as fast as you want. So then we have the thumb drops. So some people play with perfect wrist posture until their thumb hits a note, and then it's like the thumb presses and the whole wrist falls down. And once you go back to the other fingers, the wrist raises back up again. Some people have problems using their thumbs in piano. And some of us don't. I find it kind of interesting. I don't know why that is. I think it maybe just comes down to basic strength. But I want you to patrol your piano playing, because a lot of people did this. Just to make sure you're not experiencing the drop. And playing that way is also going to slow you down. Like the more time your wrist spends kind of dancing around, the less you're going to be able to play quickly. And also, I don't know if you've probably heard this from these little examples, but it creates like an undesirable thunk. Like it kind of ends up creating an accent in a place where you don't always want an accent. So try to keep your thumb level as best you can. And for you, this might be really easy, but it also might be really hard. It kind of just depends on your physiology. The next category is a quick but important point, and it's on staccatos. So the adjudicator was really picky about articulations and staccatos in particular. We're not going to go into crazy depth here, but I just want to share some insight she had on how to make your staccatos come through more clearly, more quickly, so they don't sound so heavy, so they sound light like they're meant to sound. So she made a really good analogy with two different types of staccatos, and you tell me which one sounds more desirable. So you can have sticky peanut butter finger staccatos or crisp popcorn staccatos.
Да нет, ты что, тут столько снега выпало, вообще все рейсы отменили. На самом деле еще работа навалила.
Папочка, не скучай.
Стараюсь. Давайте, пока. Салют. Врубай Сберзвук.
I mean, peanut butter is delicious, but like as a finger analogy for how you play, probably not the ideal one. We want our staccatos bright and crisp. If they're kind of slow and lengthy like that, and sticky peanut butter fingers, it makes your playing almost sound lazy. And a lot of the times, the solution to this is to simply play on the tips of your fingers. So, and this has to do with wrist position too. So if your wrist is a little raised or like level, it's easier to play on your fingertips. Because if your fingers are a little flat and you're playing on the finger pads, it's really tough. I'm really struggling to create that like staccato sound. Whereas when it's rounded, it's much easier to play nice staccatos that don't sound really thick. Since we were in the church, since we were in a church, the adjudicator had the kids put their fingers on the back of the bench, and then she had them try that out on the bench and just kind of listen to the clicking sound. So she had them play staccatos with flat fingers and listen to the clicking sound, and then she had them do it rounded and listen to the clicking sound. And it sounds a lot more like pop, pop, pop when you play with rounded fingertips instead of finger pads. So whether you're a kid or an adult, it's a useful tidbit there. The third point is interpretation. So of all the points we're talking about today, posture and wrist stuff is obviously a really big deal, but this was possibly the most frequently mentioned of the topics, that of interpretation. So this includes things like creating mood in the piece, creating a sound picture, and we'll talk more about that, and telling a story with your piece, and also being able to play expressive and clear melodies. So let's talk about melodic shaping. We have a tendency to just kind of ignore slurs when we see them on the page. Like we kind of get it in a general sense that it means to play smooth, but there is more to a slur than that a lot of the time, especially when we're talking about the melody. So the adjudicator was always quick to point out that one of the most natural ways to play a phrase, let's look at this one just because it all fits on one line. So the most natural way to play a phrase is to rise, and you can kind of see the notes rise too, and then fall, and also you can kind of see the notes fall too. So how do you do that on the piano? Well, we can do that by creating a subtle crescendo and diminuendo. It's kind of like we're swelling up to the midpoint with just a gentle crescendo, and then we let the sound fall back down with a similarly gentle diminuendo. And what this does is it gives music a natural, lifelike, almost a breathing quality. Over and over, I saw her point out to the kids how important it is to have phrases that rise and fall, like a crescendo and diminuendo. Not like, not to like that dramatic degree, but subtly, like enough to make it kind of sound lifelike and breathing. Sorry, let me do that again. Everything I'm doing today is a C5 finger scale. It's just like a really good standard. Easy to demonstrate. Easy to play too if you're trying this at home. And it just kind of has like it's almost like a wave-like sound to it. I did a G5 finger scale. I'm switching it up. I love how frequently the adjudicator talked about painting a sound picture during festival week. Like a lot of the times we learn pieces with these interesting, expressive titles, Stormy Sea or Mist, or like some of the ones I got on the screen here, and so on. So what she did is she asked the students how to paint that sound picture in the audience's mind. So how do we do that? How do we create a sound picture? What are the paints on our palettes, to go with the metaphor? So our tools or paints would be things like staccatos, tempo, phrasing, etc., etc. And these are how we impact the overall mood and tone of a piece. So it's really important to consider all of these details when you're playing beyond simply learning to play the notes. So learning the notes of a piece is like a good first step, but there's so much more to music beyond that. And finally, the fourth point is entertaining. So she asked the question to a group of kids, what is the point of performing a piano piece, anything, performing anything? And none of the kids really, they're just kind of hemming and hawing a little bit. And so she told them the point of performing is to entertain the audience. We as performers are entertainers. Now, entertaining, I don't just mean like the ability to get people to stand up and start dancing or anything like that. Entertaining can be like, someone can be entertained by a heartbreaking rendition of a very sad piece, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a happy thing. Entertainment is really just more about creating an emotional connection between you and the audience. You draw them in and they can get enjoyment out of it. So anyway, as a performer, it's your job to entertain. So how do you do that? So the first thing is to take risks. All too often what happens to us as performers is we spend all this time working on the details, but then as soon as we go and show it to someone or perform for someone or a group of people, all the details just kind of disappear. We get on stage, we get nervous, and we just like kind of clam up. I see this every year with my students. They can play beautifully in the classroom, they can play beautifully at home, very expressive, lots of dynamics, and then they get up on stage and there's like not a drop of dynamic contrast. It's all very flat. Or if the student has a really lively, upbeat piece, they're playing loudly in the studio, they've got all the zest and energy they need, but then they get on stage and play kind of nervously, they hold back, they don't go above like a medium volume. So as the adjudicator said, live a little, live on the edge. It is a huge risk, it's a huge emotional risk. It's not even a risk, it's a perceived risk to get up and play an emotional piece for someone and open up your heart in that way. It is taking a risk, it is a little bit of a stretch outside of our comfort zone, but it's an important one if we want to be able to play effectively. So another thing with posture that she talked about is when you're finished a piece, is it a good idea to just kind of like, and then your hands kind of like flop in your lap and you walk away? I mean, no, that like obviously I was kind of setting that up to be a bad idea. So when you're playing, say you're playing something like really beautiful, like lots of flowing sounds and phrases, how are you going to be moving your hands? You want to move your hands in a rounded way. So let's go back to the first example. I know I'm getting like sidetracked here. So if a performer finishes like, they finish with like a loud fortissimo, and their hands kind of, instead of just, you do see the difference. It just adds to the entertainment value. It adds to that, like, to that confidence. And if you're doing like an expressive, beautiful piece and you're kind of finishing it like, it's kind of like a nice little elegant wrist instead of again. So do you see the difference? How you move she kind of called it the beautiful dancing wrists. So how you move your hands when you play can kind of impact the entertainment value that the audience can perceive. We have so little else to do as piano players. We can't like dance while we play or anything because there's so much focus. So I mean, little gestures and pretty movements and stuff make a huge difference in the audience's eyes. And I think it impacts the way we play too. So as piano players, we basically like sit down and then we face forward the whole time we play. Like, it's not like with singers where you can kind of like get up and dance and make eye contact with people. That's why I'm not on stage singing, because that's how I'd be dancing. Oh boy. Anyway, so I want to talk to you about commanding the stage with posture. And I was super proud about my students this year because the adjudicator commented to most of my students that they did a great job sitting down on the bench, which seems like nothing, but they took the time to fix the bench, to make sure the bench was kind of in the right spot for them. We talked about this, we rehearsed this. They sat on the edge of the bench, which gives them like nice flat feet on the floor. They took a moment to get their foot on the pedal if that's what they needed to do. Kind of waited, did like maybe a breath or two, and then they played. So something so small like this makes such a big difference because it kind of shows the audience that you're confident and that like, you know, you're not just like running up to the stage and like sitting down the bench and like racing through your piece and then running away. Like, oh my goodness, get me out of here. You're kind of showing like that you're comfortable with this situation. You're okay moving a bench around in front of people because you're confident. You're not concerned. You're not freaked out. Even if your heart's beating a little faster, it gives the illusion of that confidence. It also allows you to play better because when you get set up in in the right spot and make sure you're kind of grounded before you start playing, you're going to have a more centered performance. And that is all for today's episode on just adjudicating music festival, the things that I learned that I thought might, help you out. And I know most of you are not kids. There's probably a few kids out there. But even as an adult, these are still things that we can kind of think about when we're playing. So hopefully you got something out of that. Thank you for
我睇咗好大量嘅 comment， 同埋因為我老師咧係英國皇家音樂考官嚟嘅，咁我同佢溝通之間咧，我發現到其實佢哋都注重一樣嘢嘅，呢個係絕對會慳你分數嘅一樣嘢嚟嘅。大家好，歡迎嚟到名門音樂，我係全老師啊。今日想同大家分享嘅咧，當然就係 ABRSM 點樣去攞到一個好嘅成績啦。咁 distinction， 哇，好多同學仔都講話好難喎，即係都見到好少人先攞到 distinction， 點攞啊咁樣？你哋錄嘅4首歌裏邊一定要係近乎冇錯音啦。咁然之後咧係流暢度係完全好順㗎啦，咁跟住然之後咧，我自己個人心得有啲 tips 可以分享俾大家嘅，就係、呼吸，因為咧你應該咧喺無論每一個級數裏邊咧，包括今年2021年到2022年嘅1、2級考試歌咧，你見到裏面有啲細細嘅逗號咧，其實咧係叫你呼吸嘅。咁呢啲嘢如果冇做咧，其實都慳你分數。咁第二樣嘢啊，包括 articulation 講緊啲乜嘢咧？有好多考試歌咧，其實係裏邊係話跳啦，同埋練咧。如果你做唔足，又或者你可能你覺得做咗，咁當然因為級數越高，你手抱越長嘅時候咧，你裏邊 lost 咗嘅 articulation 可能有時有一兩粒音冇跳到咧，其實都慳咗。所以喺拍片裏邊嘅過程係非常之艱難嘅，尤其是8級佢哋拍成差唔多成18分鐘一個 take 咧，係佢哋用咗好長嘅時間同埋好多嘅努力咧，先攞到呢個 distinction 喎。另外咧，當然係每一位家長都會知㗎啦，無論1級到8級嘅譜咧，幾簡單都好咧，一定會揾到啲位咧係一個 F 啦、一個 P 或者一啲段落大聲啊、啲段落細聲嘅。咁當然呢啲係需要做足㗎啦。咁 distinction 講到明 distinction 啦，咁當然要求係更加高啦。就係無論可能考生自己可能喺現場覺得有做嘅時候咧，其實需要咧錄完嘅時候自己聽翻，究竟原來聽翻嗰條片時候，發覺唔係真係咁明顯嘅啫喎，原來漸大啊漸細，原來都係少少嘅啫喎。咁所以咧喺拍片嘅時候咧，其實需要注意一下咧，可能因為隔住咗個電話或者即係隔住咗個 mon 咧，其實現場聽到嘅對比咧，真係嗰個感染力係細咗啲嘅。咁所以我建議學生咧，要拍呢啲考試片嘅時候咧，應該要將佢哋嘅大細聲咧，其實要更明顯一啲去傳遞到俾人嘅。咁另外啊，我相信有睇咗好大量嘅 comment， 同埋因為我老師咧係英國皇家音樂考官嚟嘅，咁我同佢溝通之間咧，我發現到其實佢哋都注重一樣嘢嘅，就係歌與歌之間啦。咁4首歌咧，有啲同學仔咧會好衝動，尤其是可能因為拍片嘅時候可能好緊張啊。咁4首歌咧，一落去講完嘢之後咧，就即刻彈，然之後歌接歌都係即刻彈，係冇休息嘅時間嘅。咁呢樣嘢 ABRSM 其實係雖然冇喺文字上講咗出嚟，但係佢哋每一位考官都好 care 呢樣嘢，就係你歌同歌之間咧係應該要休息一陣，等你自己個 mood 調教到你覺得你 ready 下一首歌啦，你先去彈出嚟。呢個係絕對會慳你分數嘅一樣嘢嚟嘅。咁然後咧就係關於你每一首嘅 technical problem 啦。而我每一首 technical problem 講緊啲乜嘢咧，就係關於你首考試歌裏邊啦。當然啦，話到明考試梗係有嘢想考你㗎啦。無論1至8級都好啦，每一首擺得落 ABRSM 嘅考試歌，當然一定有佢自己嘅目的嘅。咁無論係譬如話，可能嗰首歌係特登考你3連音嘅，考你成首歌3連音準唔準嘅，又或者可能如果你留意到啲初級1、2、3級嘅歌咧，會有啲成首都跳嘅。咁咧，佢哋應該每一首歌咧，其實都有一個 一個主旨嘅，你要揾到佢出嚟，然之後針對住佢想考慮嗰樣嘢去做咧，咁你就會好容易達到好高分啦。哇！咁講咗咁耐，事不宜遲，我哋去示範一下咩 APRSM 嘅 distinction 咧係點樣做出嚟嘅。咁我哋今日咧請嚟咗 Mango 同學為我哋示範最新2021年嘅5級鋼琴嘅 distinction 版本啦。咁當然佢係用咗好大量嘅時間喺屋企好努力咁樣練習啦，而佢成個過程咧，只不過用多過3個月，由佢去揀歌去到拍片，去經歷過呢個5級嘅過程嘅。事不宜遲啊！咁啊，影片開始之前，記住俾個 like 啊！咁我哋去片啦。 咧，大家睇完 Mango 條片之後咧，都有個概念，大概點樣彈係可以攞到 distinction 嘅。咁日後咧，我會拍更加多關於鋼琴資訊嘅片啦。如果大家中意我嘅片咧，麻煩大家睇一下我嘅影片啦，亦都訂閱 subscribe 我嘅 YouTube channel、Facebook 同埋 IG 嘅。我係全老師，下次見啦，拜拜。
Готовим стейк чак-ролл. Какая мраморность. Смазываем стейк маслом и отправляем мясо на раскаленный гриль. Фарш же припущен и тоже отправляется на гриль. Подаем с перечным соусом. Идеально. Не дайте ковиду лишить вас любимых вкусов. Выбор за вами. Вакцинируйтесь.
近排咧，無論係老師啊、家長啊，都對住 ABRSM 呢個 Online Music Theory 或者中文叫做網上樂理考試咧，充滿住無限咁多個問號啦。咁經過咧，我喺 ABRSM 嘅官網上面去睇晒所有嘅資料，同埋同考官去溝通之下咧，今日咧一日去解答大家對呢個網上考試嘅問題。
你 like 咗未啊？like 完之後咧，仲要撳訂閱呢個掣同埋撳個鐘佢咯。
Hello， 大家好，歡迎嚟到靈魂音樂，我係全老師啊。今日想同大家一齊去研究一下 ABRSM 網上樂理考試嘅所有問題嘅，包括你嘅報名嘅過程啦。咁首先咧，報名嘅日期咧係由4月26號到5月4日嘅。咁而 試嘅日期咧係由5月26號到6月23日嘅。咁網上嘅樂理考試咧，同埋呢個傳統嘅樂理筆試咧，到底有咩唔同咧？咁 APRSM 咧喺早前3月12號咧已經公布咗，如果你嘅地區即係譬如話香港咁啦，係有得考呢一個嘅網上樂理考試嘅話咧，筆試咧就會取消㗎啦。換言之咧，以後咧喺香港咧都會係考網上樂理考試㗎啦，就唔會再有筆試嘅出現啦。咁所以咧，以後嚟咧，我都唔會點樣去比較究竟有咩唔同，我會直接同大家講網上樂理考試佢嘅分數啦，佢係點樣考嘅。咁今次 APRSM 呢個網上樂理考試咧，滿分係75分嘅。咁啊首先咧，好多學生咧即刻就會想知道乜嘢1分合格啊，50分就係合格啦。咁如果 merit 嘅話咧，就係60分以上。distinction 咧就係65分以上嘅，咁佢同傳統考試咧有咩加咗，有咩減咗咧？今次咧喺呢個網上樂理考試裏邊咧取消咗1C 去5嘅呢個 cut 嘅考試啦，呢一個題種啦，咁然之後咧佢加咗啲乜嘢咧？佢加咗 cadence， 即係有 perfect cadence、imperfect cadence、playful cadence 嗰啲嘅題目嘅。好，咁喺以下落嚟咧，我會分為2個階段啦。一咧就係你考試前2個星期要做啲乜嘢啦，然之後考試當日咧你係要做啲乜嘢嘅。咁考試前2個星期要做啲乜嘢咧 ？APRSM 咧會 send 封信去你嘅 email 嗰度啦，咁裏邊有一條 link 啦，咁嗰條 link 咧就係俾你去裝一個叫做 auf YouNow software 嘅一個程式啦，咁然之後你透過呢個程式去裝一個 PSI 嘅 software， total 你裝咗2個程式啦。咁考生問我啦，喂，今次嘅考試裏邊可唔可以用 tablet、iPad、手機去考呢個樂理考試咧？唔得，你淨係可以用你嘅手提電腦或者你嘅 desktop 嘅啫。好，咁你需要嘅咧係一部可以上到網㗎啦，有鏡頭㗎啦，有咪嘅手提電腦。咁另外，如果你朋友想同我講話係用 desktop 去考試，即係做台式嗰啲好大部嘅電腦咧，咁咧你就係需要一部手提電話咧，裏邊咧你自己間房啦。咁嗰個咧一陣你可以睇到官方嗰條電腦。咁我主要咧今條片咧會同大家講，如果你係有一個 notebook 去考試嘅情況下咧，咁你就要裝 APRSM 俾你嘅 software 啦。而呢個 auf YouNow software 咧就會幫你 check 下你部手提電腦咧究竟啱唔啱佢哋用喺考試度咧，譬如話你嘅鏡頭用唔用到咧，你個咪 work 唔 work 咧，咁呢個 software 咧會幫你 check 晒可唔可以用喺 APRSM 嘅樂理考試裏邊嘅。好，咁喺考試當日咧，如果學生咧係18歲以下嘅話咧，咁就需要家長或者老師去陪佢哋喺一間房裏邊考試啦。咁APRSM 嘅官網咧已經寫到明㗎啦，喺考試開始之前咧，呢一段時間咧。呢一位成年人，無論係家長或者老師咧，你都係需要陪住18歲以下嘅考生嘅。咁直至到佢哋開始咗考試咧，老師或者家長咧就可以離開你哋嘅房間啦，或者你如果選擇可以留低陪住考生嘅。咁網上咧有好多嘅老師啦、家長都問緊。喂，咁喺5月到6月，咁我報咗名啦，咁幾時考㗎？我都要準備㗎。咁佢嘅官網裏邊嘅答法咧，就係任何時候你凌晨或者3點鐘起身考都得嘅。咁當然冇人咁做啦。咁就係 anytime 嘅。咁所以咧，點解 anytime 咧？係因為如果你18歲以下咧，你需要家長陪同。咁但係1至5可能1至6都有家長可能需要翻工嘅時候陪唔到小朋友考試。咁所以 APRSM 咧係 anytime 俾你考嘅喺呢一個考試嘅 period 裏邊。咁如果18歲以下嘅學生咧，家長咧就需要坐喺部電腦隔離，好似咁樣依家望住個鏡頭咧，幫個考生咧去 show 呢一張 ID 卡啦。咁當然啦，18歲以下如果佢個張身份證係裏面係冇自己嘅相嘅話咧，咁你就可能要用到 passport 啦，或者你嘅 APRSM 提供俾你嘅 identification form 嘅。好，咁 APRSM 咧網上亦都提供咗咧係點樣喺考試當日咧家長去預備嘅。咁除咗你話要喺面前去 show 嗰一張 ID 卡有相嘅 ID 卡啦，咁咧之後咧就需要咧拎住你部 notebook 手提電腦咧去用個鏡頭去 scan 晒4幅牆嘅環境啦。咁跟住然之後咧就係考生嗰張台上面啦，同埋台嘅附近 嘅地下佢防止咧，可能你打電話啊、書啊打開咗啊咁樣嘅。咁跟住然之後咧，如果你間房裏邊，你屋企間房裏邊咧係有鋼琴嘅話咧，呢個琴蓋咧係需要閂埋佢嘅，你係唔可以睇到琴蓋啦。咁當然啦，喺考試裏邊咧，你考生係需要用上嘅草稿紙去計算嘅時候咧，咁所以咧，你預備嘅草稿紙咧，無論係白少少嘅草稿紙啦、間行紙啦、線譜都好啦，唔可以寫任何錄寫上面嘅係白少少嘅。然之後咧，每一頁你預備咗3頁嘅話咧，你哋3頁都要收晒成版面嘅 A4 紙俾佢睇，你係冇寫任何錄線貼紙嘅嘢喺度嘅。咁 show 完之後咧，咁咧就可以開始考試啦。當然咧，喺考試嘅過程裏邊咧，考生咧最 care 佢哋嘅問題咧，包括廁所位啊、佢哋嘅飲水位啊嘅時間嘅。咁咧呢啲我都一律都 search 咗啦。咁咧喺去廁所的話咧，你咧可以選擇2個做法，一用張紙寫低嘅去廁所啦。咁應該我相信係用英文啦。咁就係用話你係自己話去廁所，然之後將呢一張紙喺你嘅電腦鏡頭面前展示出嚟，咁你先好離開你嘅鏡頭。或者2，你係喺鏡頭面前去講你去廁所啦，咁你就可以離開啦。咁你離開嘅時間可以離開幾耐咧？5分鐘，你就可以離開 maximum 5分鐘嘅，最多5分鐘，你一定要翻嚟呢個位佢哋考試嘅。咁另外啦，飲水咧，你係可以有帶一樽支裝嘅水啦。咁當然嘅支裝水裏邊咧，上面咧係唔可以有任何圖畫啊、文字嘅，純透明、全透明嘅一支水嘅。好，咁喺呢個你考試咧，喺呢個 program 開始之前咧，你係需要熄晒你所有呢一部電腦裏邊你用緊嘅嘢嘅，你淨係可以開呢一個 software 去考試啦。咁跟住，然之後咧，如果係話你漏咗喎，你有個 YouTube 可能未刪的話咧，你個 program 咧佢係唔會俾你去開始呢個 ABRSM 嘅網上學歷考試嘅。咁好啦，喺開始咗之後咧，如果咧你嘗試去收咗呢一個 software 去 click，譬如話上網，我上 Google search 啲答案咧係唔得嘅。只要你一出咗呢一個 program 咧，呢一個考試咧就會即刻中斷㗎。咁我相信應該都會 DQ 咗個考試。喺考完試之後咧，一定要喺個鏡頭面前將你用過嘅草稿紙喺鏡頭面前咧撕爛咗佢咧先得嘅。如果唔得嘅話咧，呢個步驟咧係好嚴重嘅。喺 ABRSM 裏邊咧，佢個官網咧提供咗2條影片嘅，一條咧係包括咧考試前2星期要裝嘅一啲 program 啦，佢教你點裝點樣做。第2條片咧係考試當日家長要做啲咩啊，點樣 scan 呢間房啊，幾大耳機啊等等好多個步驟。咁喺考